Chapter 145, 4 July, Interlude, Tony. There were perks to being a celebrity, as Tony knew very well. Harley, unfortunately, had had more experience with the negative side effects so far, but today was helping to turn that around. At the moment, the most salient of those perks was a backdoor VIP pass to the National Museum of American History an hour before opening on the busiest day of the year. The jet lag was working in their favor for the early start, too. Despite 4 days in Malibu, neither of them were fully off of London time yet. The American History Museum wasn't the biggest or flashiest of the Smithsonian's buildings, but it still had a lot to offer. There were exhibitions of the history of American democracy and political life, American inventions, technology, and entertainment, collections of artifacts from all the presidents from Washington to Ellis, and the original Star-Spangled Banner was always a big draw, of course. It was also probably the museum Harley was least interested in. Being British, she knew even less about American history than Tony expected. World history is more of a secondary school thing except for, ancient Greece and stuff, she told him. And then, of course, at Hogwarts, we do history of magic instead, and Binns just puts everyone to sleep. Something Tony really didn't care for, but that was a concern for another day. Well, you're an American citizen, he told her. Even got the passport. This is your heritage, too. Tony would have made a wisecrack about rooting for the other team in her position, but Harley just took a minute to digest that in silence. Understandable, really, he supposed. It wouldn't surprise him if it took her a while to through how she felt about being both a Brit and an American. Was your whole family American? She asked him after a while. My dad's family was. Mom's parents were from Barcelona. In fact, you've probably got some third cousins over there now. Really, can we go visit them? Actually, I've never visited myself, but we can try it. Oh, and we can visit my cousins in New York too, she said excitedly. Tony stopped short and turned to stare at her. You have cousins in New York? Well, sort of. There are Potters in New York anyway. I mean, they split off in the 1600s, but still, the 1600s, he thought. In that light, it was less surprising that she had cousins and more surprising that she could trust them. But that could be useful, now that he thought about it. He pulled out his phone and tapped a very specific app. Hey, Jarvis, new query, he said. Americans named Potter who have the profile of magical world natives. There were 72,175 Potters recorded on the most recent census, sir, Jarvis reported. Correlating their records will take some time. He looked back at Harley. There in New York City, he confirmed. That's what I heard. At least some of them work for Macusa. Localized to New York City, he said. That should be more manageable. He let Jarvis get started on that while they continued their tour. Undoubtedly, the most popular draw today would be the whole exhibit set up just for Captain America and the Howling Commandos. Harley may still have thought of herself as British, but she did care about the man who was Tony's fellow Avenger and had led the defense of New York. Except after a few minutes, Tony noticed she was particularly fixated on the video screens showing the before and after pictures of Steve Rogers from the experiment. The one where he went from 5'4" and 95 pounds to 6'2" and 240 pounds of solid muscle in a matter of minutes. She stood there for quite a while looking back and forth between them with her head tilted in thought. Tony didn't think it was that interesting, although it also didn't escape him that one of the after photos was shirtless. Ahem, he said behind her, making her jump a bit. If you're admiring the male form, I feel obligated to remind you that you're 11 and he's 94. Harley rapidly flushed, but she forcefully shook her head. Dad, that's wasn't it, she said. Then what's so interesting at Roger's photos? He asked her. She waved her hand back and forth between the pictures. That, she insisted more quietly, it's magic. Magic, Tony said in surprise. Yes. How do you figure? Harley looked up at him like he was being obtuse. How? Because it violates conservation of mass. Now, Tony looked back and forth between the photos in confusion himself. It couldn't. Heck knew the provenance of the super soldier serum. It was made by Dr. Erskine. Even the Vita Rays weren't Howard's invention, who maybe had figured out some form of alchemy. They were Erskine's, who was a refugee from Nazi Germany. Entire family dead in Dachau, only in the United States a couple years before his death. Most of the German records about him lost in the war. How much did Therioli know about him? Eyes widening, Tony pulled out his phone again and spoke into it. Jarvis, I want a deep dive into Abraham Erskine and his family going back 3 generations. Flag anything that looks like it could be magic. Holly was still staring at him in surprise. Dad, she said reasonably, you told me about the laws of thermodynamics just 2 days ago. How did you think it worked? Wasn't entirely sure, he admitted. My dad knew how to use the Vita Rays, but he didn't really understand them. Only the weird stuff happens when you get to wavelengths that short. His best guess was they had some kind of interdimensional effect. If you can reach other dimensions, it's not a closed system. Given the similarity between Vita Rays and the Gamma Rays Banner got blasted with, I thought it made sense. He trailed off and then spoke into his phone again. Jarvis, get me the same deep dive on Banner. If something magical is how he survived the accident, it would explain a lot. Saw the Avengers' powers come from magic? Harley asked. But they don't use wands and stuff, do they? I doubt it. If they were personally wizards, Jarvis would have noticed, but it could still be the break we need. If Cap is a magic super soldier and Banner is some kind of Hulk, that could be our in to tell the rest of the team about magic. Because the Hulk also violates conservation of mass. He violates conservation of a lot of stuff. Thor makes sense. Sufficiently advanced alien technology. But if I didn't know about Vita Rays, I'd say Gamma Rays doing that should be impossible. He patted her on the back as they continued to the next exhibit. Good job, Holly. I wouldn't have caught that. It was kind of obvious, she said. Hey, all the best insights are. After all, we're Starks. We do the impossible and make it look easy. Holly's face tinged pink again, and he had to wonder if that was wrong approach. Despite being Iron Man's daughter, she might not have thought of herself as having a family legacy to live up to. But there was no time to dwell on it. The regular visitors were starting to trickle in, and Tony's priority right now was teaching Holly how to evade hordes of admirers. Plus, they still had to get up to the White House in time for the president's speech. Chapter 146, 4 July Roman II, President Ellis's speech. Remarks delivered by President Matthew Ellis on the South Lawn of the White House, Wednesday, July 4, 2012. My fellow Americans, it was 236 years ago today that 56 men in Philadelphia proclaimed a new nation founded on a radical idea. They wrote in the Declaration of Independence, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." But the truth is that to the world in which they lived, those words weren't self-evident. They were truly revolutionary. The idea that the people can govern themselves. The idea that freedom needs no justification. The idea that any man or woman on the street can call their leader a blithering idiot without fear of represalias, I know all too well. These are the things that made the United States the great nation it is today. And for generation after generation over the past 2 centuries, the great work of the United States has been to move ourselves, sometimes at great cost, ever closer to that ideal. But it's also true that we are living in perhaps even more unprecedented times today. 2 months ago, the question humankind has wondered about from the dawn of history, are we alone? Was answered in the most brutal way possible in New York City. That day, we faced the largest attack on American soil since Pearl Harbor, and it was only the selfless actions of our National Guard, police, and other first responders, and of course the Avengers that stopped the death toll from rising far higher. And so, as we celebrate our nation's Independence Day, we also honor the brave men and women who defended our country on May 4th. There are few symbols of American patriotism greater than Captain Steve Rogers, better known as Captain America. Captain Rogers' exploits are ones that children have learned in history class for generations. On November 3, 1943, Captain Rogers learned of the capture of hundreds of members of the 107th Infantry Regiment, including his best friend, Sergeant James Barnes. Despite a rescue mission being deemed too risky and his own deployment experience consisting of a single USO tour, he undertook a one-man rescue mission hundreds of miles into enemy territory and single-handedly returned 417 American prisoners of war home alive. For this extraordinary heroism, Captain Rogers was awarded our nation's highest military decoration, the Congressional Medal of Honor, but he refused to return to Washington for the award ceremony, instead choosing to keep fighting in Europe. Later, on March 1, 1945, Captain Rogers led an assault on the headquarters of Nazi Germany's Deep Science Division, Hydra. Though the assault was successful, they were too late to stop Hydra from launching its super weapon, the Valkyrie, a nuclear bomber capable of reaching the United States. Captain Rogers boarded the Valkyrie and killed Hydra's leader, the enemy super soldier Johann Schmidt. But without enough time to take full control of the plane, he deliberately crashed it into the Arctic Ocean, where he was believed to have been killed in action until his recovery last year, this time saving millions of American lives. Under the Army's regulations at the time, Captain Rogers was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions on that mission, and for the past 66 years, both medals have lain in the Smithsonian. But today, as part of the Battle of New York Memorial Act, the United States military has returned to its policy from World War I and earlier, and Captain Rogers' Distinguished Service Cross has been upgraded to a second Medal of Honor, only the 20th issued in our nation's history. Captain, please step forward. President Ellis places both medals around Captain Rogers' neck and salutes him. And somehow, it's no surprise that Captain America was born on the 4th of July, so please let me also wish you a happy 94th birthday, Captain. Now, Captain Rogers said he would only show up if the other defenders of New York were appropriately honored. With us today are representatives from the New York Army National Guard, who answered the call to defend New York City from the Chitauri. Among them is Colonel Trevor Jackson, commander of the 53rd Army Liaison Team, the successor unit to Captain Rogers' own 107th Infantry Regiment. In recognition of their service in defense of the homeland, I am pleased to award both Captain Rogers and the responding members of the New York National Guard the newly created Extraterrestrial Defense Service Medal. All of you are a credit to New York and the United States Army National Guard. The President and several high-ranking Army officers pin the new medals to Captain Rogers and the National Guard representatives and salutes them. And I should add that members of the NYPD and FDNY are also being recognized in their own ceremonies in New York. But there are several other people whose actions there deserve particular commendation. Agent Clint Barton, Agent Natasha Romanoff, and the late Agent Phil Coulson and Dr. Bruce Banner, for their own instrumental roles in the defense of New York, have been awarded the Presidential Citizens Medal. Agents Barton and Romanoff were able to be here with us today, and I invite them to come forward to receive their medals. Agents Barton and Romanoff step forward, and the President presents them with their medals in the standard display cases. Annotation as reported by CNN. A White House press release stated that Agent Coulson left no next of kin to accept his medal on his behalf, and it will instead be displayed inside SHIELD headquarters. No official comment was given about Banner's absence, but insider sources have claimed that the Secret Service refused to allow him entry to the White House grounds. We have also given an award to Thor, Prince of Asgard. It's hard to believe I'm saying this, but being a Norse god and not a citizen of our nation or even our planet, he is not eligible for the Citizens Medal. But after discussing the matter with congressional leaders, we have agreed to give him an equivalent award in the form of the Congressional Silver Medal, which is available for him to pick up the next time he ice an Earth. And finally, I want to recognize the man who dealt the final blow to the Chitauri invasion, Tony Stark, better known as Iron Man. During the battle in New York, it was determined that it was not possible to close the Chitauri wormhole from the Earth side, but only by an attack on the other side. As the only defender capable of operating in the vacuum of space, Stark volunteered to carry a nuclear-tipped missile through the wormhole, at great risk to his own life, destroying the enemy command ship and disabling the entire Chitauri army. Stark then escaped back to Earth through the wormhole less than a second before it closed. For his extraordinary heroism, I am pleased to present Mr. Stark with our nation's highest civilian award, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, with distinction. Tony Stark steps forward, and the President places the medal around his neck. And I understand congratulations are also in order to Mr. Stark for becoming a father. Harley Stark is also here watching today. I want you to know your father is a credit to this nation and a hero in every sense of word. And that applies to everyone standing on this stage. We the people salute you for your service and sacrifice. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America. Happy 4th of July, everyone. Let's get the party started. Chapter 147, 5 July, Harley's Diary. From the diary of Harley Stark, 5 July yesterday was a busy day. We went to the museum in the morning and then the White House. I got to meet the President of the United States, which was really cool. Hermione's going to be so jealous. I didn't talk to the President much. He just asked me how I was finding America, and I said something about, it's a lot bigger than I'm used to. Although by the afternoon, I realized it's a lot hotter too. Malibu was hot, but we didn't spend that much time outside, and Washington was really humid. Dad said the city was built on a swamp, so it's always like that in summer. The president gave people a bunch of medals for saving New York from the aliens. He gave Dad the Medal of Freedom, which is supposed to be a really big deal. Jarvis said it's equivalent to the Victoria Cross. The president gave some dragon dung story about how shooting the nuke through the wormhole was part of the plan, though. I guess they didn't want people to panic about it. But Dad seemed uncomfortable when he was talking about that. I got to meet 3 of the other Avengers, too, Captain America, Black Widow, and Hawkeye. I thought they'd be scary-looking spy people from how Dad talked about them, or at least Black Widow would. But they were nice to me. Dad said they were clearly biased. They asked me about living with Dad and about my school. I don't know how much they believed. Dad made me go over a sort of cover story before I met them, and he said it should be close to the truth without mentioning magic, so it sounded more natural. Luckily, he told them that some of the stuff, like why he went there last month, shouldn't be talked about in public. That's one of the reasons he wants to tell the Avengers about magic. They're all super smart and paranoid. He doesn't think we can fool them forever. Plus, Thor already knows. After the speech, we had authentic American barbecue. It was better than what we got in England when Uncle Vernon couldn't get out of taking me to a restaurant. Captain Rogers laughed when I said it needed more different kinds of meat like the feasts at school. And then Agent Barton said, "Oh no. You aeronauting us up in the barbecue department and made me and Dad get a sample platter. I didn't know Americans had so many kinds of sauces, and the ranch dressing was pretty good, too. There were booths and stuff on the mall for American universities and national parks and stuff like that. And then in the evening, there was a concert where they played a bunch of patriotic songs. I almost started singing God Save the Queen when they played My Country, 'Tis of Thee. And of course, there were fireworks at the end. A lot more than I've ever seen on bonfire night. It was fun even though it was an American holiday I don't know much about. We're flying to New York for the next week. We have a bunch of stuff to do there. I'll get to see Avengers Tower. It's still weird that Dad built a whole skyscraper. And I can meet Dr. Banner, so that'll be all the Avengers except Thor. Agent Koenig's coming back out tomorrow and scan Dr. Banner to see if his Hulk powers are magic. Agent Koenig can impersonate one of his brothers, so that's easy. But even if Hulk and Captain America are magic, it might take a while for Macusa to agree to tell the team if they do at all. Ron says the British ministry's always slow about stuff like that. Then we're going to check out Macusa and try to go shopping in magical New York, and Dad wants to visit Ilvermorny to check out the school there, and he wants to try to track down my cousins. We can ask at Macusa, of course, but Jarvis is already trying to do background checks on the people we think are my cousins. It'll be nice to meet more Potters, but also, if they seem trustworthy, we can have one of them be my magical guardian instead of Professor Sinistra. I think that'll work, since I'm an American citizen and not just British. That still feels like the weirdest thing. But the other thing is I might be getting lessons from the Avengers. I mentioned yesterday about school having a self-defense class, but the teacher was terrible, and Agent Romanov said she could give me some pointers. I wasn't sure if she was being serious, at least about making it a long-term thing, and Dad wasn't sure either until she promised to tone it down for my level. But after everything that happened with Voldemort and Quirrell, he wants me to get some kind of self-defense training, and it would be really cool to learn from the Avengers. He also talked about me to learn how to use a gun, even though wizards don't use guns, and neither does the UK. I suppose it could be useful, though. Chapter 148, 7 July, Harley's Diary. From the Diary of Harley Stark. 7 July we went shopping in magical New York today, and it was a fiasco. First, we got all the way to the cashier in the first shop before we noticed the prices weren't in galleons because Corsimerica doesn't use the same currency. I didn't think of it because I've never done this before. Dad said he didn't think of it because Pepper always handles the money. And Pepper said she didn't think of it because we were already working in a different currency, and she didn't know the symbols. She sounded kind of embarrassed. I get the feeling she doesn't often make mistakes like that. Also, Dad said that with a small population and high mobility, a global currency would make sense, but I guess we don't do that. So we had to go to the bank to exchange currency. Macusa uses something called dragons. A dragget is a really big octagonal silver coin that's worth exactly 2 sickles, but it can be divided into eighths like a piece of 8. Ah, the eighths, they call them bits, can magically snap back together too, which is neat. That could be a good way to tell it's real too. There are 16 dragons in a gold Knox, but they still count things in dragons, and a bit equals 34 copper springs. So we went back to the shop, and Dad bought the color-changing robe he wanted, but it only got worse from there. Pepper had to veto stuff like an animated suit of armor and other things we didn't have anywhere to put in the tower. Then in the apothecary, Dad got in an argument with the clerk. He said, if unicorns are a protected species, how do you get the horns? Which was a good question. If you can't kill a unicorn, or you'll be cursed, how do you get the horns off of them? The clerk said they get them from unicorns that die of natural causes, but Dad mentioned that they're kind of like ivory, and muggles ban ivory completely to stop poaching, and the clerk got offended by that because the horns are worth a lot of money, and they're important for potions. We still bought a unicorn horn, though, and some basic ingredients, and 3 extra cauldrons including a self-stirring copper one. Then we went to a herbologist to buy some plant-spotted plants. Pepper says that's very important. But Dad asked for Devil's Snare, which they didn't have, and made the clerk suspicious. And Pepper said no to anything that would make a lot of noise, attack us, walk away, or burn down the flat, which didn't leave a lot left that was magical. We only bought a flitterbloom and a shrivelfig seedling. The sweet shop was good, although a lot of the sweets were different from what we have in Britain. Then we to a shop for enchanted equipment, and Dad bugged the clerk with questions about the wizarding wireless before he just bought a set. But the worst was the pet shop. I reckon what happened is that the shop in London didn't have crops, but this one did. When we walked in, they all started growling and barking at Dad and Pepper because crops don't like muggles, so Pepper left and Dad hung back by the door. And that was bad because Dad and I both messed up. They had puffskins and transforming rabbits, like Dad wanted. The thing that looked like a double-ended newt was labeled as a salamander, so I don't know if it's a different kind, but anyway, I grabbed one of each to buy. Then when we got out, Pepper said, "How are we going to bring them into the tower without anyone noticing? It shouldn't even be that hard." But according to Dad, the paparazzi are always watching, and two of the Avengers are super spies. Plus, we didn't actually have full-sized cages for them, so we got those through Muggle sellers, and he and Pepper have been juggling things to be able to everything in and out of the tower without looking suspicious. Chapter 149, 11 July, Harley's Diary. From the Diary of Harley Stark. 11 July, we visited Ilvermorny yesterday. We had to go then because they only take visitors on Mondays and Tuesdays in the summer, and it was a 3-hour drive each way, so it was a long day. It seems all right, and it even has a lot of things in common with Hogwarts, but I think I'd still rather stay at Hogwarts. Ilvermorny School of Witchcraft and Wizardry is built on top of Mt. Greylock, the highest point in Massachusetts. And Dad was freaking out about that because it's not in the middle of nowhere like Hogwarts. It's in a heavily populated area and open to Muggle tourists. He said, "It's a damn state park. It's got hiking trails all over it, a lodge, a war memorial, a radio tower that should be interfered with by magic. There's nowhere to hide the place." Where is it underground? They must have done it differently in the past, but today there are magical buses that pick up students in New York, Boston, and a few other places, and I guess teleport to the top of the mountain because it doesn't take them 3 hours. The way into Ilvermorny is through the lodge up there. If you go through the right door, the lodge is a sort of gatehouse for the Ilvermorny grounds. It's easier than it sounds to get in and out unnoticed, because the lodge is only open from May to October, and even then, it's closed on Mondays and Tuesdays. The grounds are a big flat top to the mountain that definitely doesn't show up on the map. They're smaller than the Hogwarts grounds, and there's no magical forest or lake or anything. The enchantments only cover the space within the outer wall. They have room for some greenhouses and magical creature enclosures and a quadpart pitch, but that's about it. Headmaster Fontaine explained the rules of quadpart to us. He met us at the lodge when we got there. Dad said it sounds kind of like American football compared with regular football. "Well," he said, "soccer. There are 11 players on a team instead of 7. There are still 2 bludgers and 2 beaters, but no snitch and no keeper. One team gets the quad ball, and they have about 5 minutes to get it down the field and into the pot before it explodes. But it's not exact, so you never quite know how much time you have left. Parting the quad scores a point, but if it explodes on you, you're sent off, and either way, the teams switch sides then. There's no anti-stooging rule either, so the defense can kind of gang up on whoever has the quad. Well, stooging is an offensive foul, but that's the idea. If the defense intercepts the quad, they usually just throw it as far upfield as they can so it doesn't explode on them. The game ends when one team has 4 fewer chasers than the other, or one team is down to 2 chasers total. It's all ridiculous. It's rougher than Quidditch. I won't tell Dad this, but that's really saying something, and you're going to spend a lot of time on the sidelines unless you're a beater, but I guess the Americans like it. Professor Fontaine did say Ilvermorny has a full Quidditch league, so I could still play, but it's not very popular outside the teams themselves. Ilvermorny is about 4 times the size of Hogwarts. That's probably how they can manage a Quidditch league, but it's not as universal. About 34 of the English-speaking wizards in the Americas go there. The rest are homeschooled or go to small local day schools. According to Fontaine, Ilvermorny was founded by Isolde Sayre, who was supposedly a descendant of Salazar Slytherin. That was a surprise. I'd never heard anything like that at Hogwarts. She came to America on the Mayflower under the name Elia's Story. That name is on the passenger list, but he was supposed to have died in the first winter in Plymouth. The school started as a home school in 1629, and it was inspired by Hogwarts, even though the only stories they had about Hogwarts were all second-hand. They built the castle later when they got more students. The castle actually doesn't look much like Hogwarts. I couldn't really place it, but we got a postcard, and when we got back, we compared it with Hogwarts and other medieval castles, and we think it was designed by someone who'd only ever heard stories about castles. There aren't any real battlements or a defensible bailey wall. They're just decorative, and all the towers are square, but the keep is round. Jarvis says Hogwarts, or at least the oldest parts of it, looks like a real medieval fortress. There's a giant snakewood tree growing in the front courtyard, nearly as old as the school. Fontaine said it magically grew from Salazar Slytherin's wand when it was planted in the ground, and its leaves have healing powers. It was weird, though. It almost sounded like it was whispering to me in the wind, but I couldn't make out what it was saying. Dad didn't notice anything. He asked if he could have a sample, but one of the caretakers got annoyed and said no. The caretakers are a clan of something Khalid Pukwudgies, okay? They appear in Muggle folklore, and their name is Pukwudgies. They're supposed to be related to goblins, and they look a lot like them, except they have a mane of porcupine quills running down their backs. They're grumpy and complain a lot like Filch does, but Fontaine said they're free to leave any time they want, and they keep coming back. Also, he said they'd never hurt a student, but they do guard the gates so students don't go running through the lodge when muggles are there, and they help protect the school from other threats. Dad was most interested in the classes, and how good the education is there, of course. Hagrid said Hogwarts is the best magic school in the world, but it's no surprise Fontaine said Ilvermorny was. Pepper said they must at least have a bigger hiring pool. Most of the classes are the same as Hogwarts, but they stopped offering divination a long time ago, and a lot of the specific magic comes from Native American sources, especially in potions. They have a cultural studies class that covers both muggles and other magical beings. They offer a geomancy class that's based on how Native Americans cast protective enchantments with things like earthworks and totems instead of rune stones like we use in Europe. And there are more elective units for upper years like healing, artificing, and even magical painting. Dad wondered about the geomancy class because there are so many different tribes, and how do they decide what to teach? Fontaine said each tribe had its own tradition of medicine people, but as more of them started going to Ilvermorny, they shared the parts they were willing to, and witches and wizards there built up a scholarship of unified techniques. Oh, and there's one way Ilvermorny is even more isolated than Hogwarts. Since there's no magical village nearby, and the place is surrounded by muggles, there are no Hogsmeade weekends. Instead, a rotation of shopkeepers from magical New York will come up and host a sort of mini street fair once a month. That's better than nothing, but it's not the same as being able to go into town. I told Dad since he knows how to get to Hogsmeade, he could actually visit me more easily there without attracting attention. Of course, I can't go to Hogsmeade next year anyway. But Pepper said they can probably arrange one-on-one meetings in the lodge a lot easier than Hogwarts can. I guess there's nothing really wrong with Ilvermorny. It covers the same core subjects as Hogwarts, and it has more electives, and it's internationally recognized. I don't know enough about the teachers to know how good they are, even though there are a couple Hogwarts teachers I'd be happy to replace, and I could still play Quidditch. I think the only real practical difference is Dumbledore. Even Fontaine admitted Dumbledore is the most powerful wizard in the world, and with Voldemort still out there, close to Dumbledore seems like a good place to be. Dad didn't mention Voldemort, but he did ask about security. Fontaine said Ilvermorny has repelled dark wizards before, including Grindelwald's forces at one point. He didn't seem to think keeping me safe would be a problem. So I could go to Ilvermorny. I just don't want to leave my friends. I don't really want to leave Britain forever either. I'm not sure if I should say that, but Dad's still annoyed about how the school can fit on MT Greylock. He was already confused about how a place that's bigger on the inside can get enough sun and rain, and he's considering releasing a bunch of weather balloons into the local wind patterns to try to figure out the topology. but he's not sure how to get a signal out. He also has Jarvis trying to correlate all the written accounts of the mountain from before photography to see if it used to have a different shape as seen by Muggles. I don't know if he'll find anything. Chapter 150, 13 July, Training Montage. Internal AV logs for Avengers Tower. Mr. Stark's suite on floor 87, Friday, 13 July, 2012. Mr. Stark and Ms. Potts are sitting in front of a holoscreen and reviewing footage of Miss Stark. Video clip plays. Miss Stark is in the newly renovated training room with Captain Rogers and Agent Natasha Romanoff. Captain Roger demonstrates how he wraps his hands for the punching bag, and Miss Stark imitates him. Agent Romanoff watches with an amused expression while leaning against the wall. CPT Rogers, have you ever thrown a punch before? Miss Stark, not really, but I saw Uncle Vernon teaching Dudley. Uncle Vernon was a boxer. I know you have to keep your knuckles in line with your arm, and you keep your thumb to the side so it doesn't get broken. CPT Rogers chuckles and shakes his head. CPT Rogers, well, you're starting ahead of where I did, Miss Stark. Surprised. Did he break your thumbs? CPT Rogers, no, but I had no form. I just went in flailing with a haymaker and got knocked on my butt. Bucky tried to teach me, but I never really got it right until after the experiment. Agent Romanoff, of course, he didn't weight much more than you at the time. CPT Rogers, that too. The important thing is you need to have good form. It's not just so you don't hurt yourself. A jab is faster and doesn't telegraph as much as a haymaker. CPT Rogers demonstrates by throwing a right jab into his punching bag, causing it to swing out far enough that he has to stop it with his hand when it swings back. CPT Rogers, you really want to try? Miss Stark nods, then squares up in front of the punching bag. She hesitates for 2 seconds, then throws a jab into the punching bag hard enough to make it swing noticeably. CPT Rogers, surprised. That was a good start for the arm movement, but you need to lean into it. A lot of the power of a punch comes from the lower body. Pause. I gotta admit, I never expected to be teaching Howard's granddaughter how to box. Agent Romanoff, not used to teaching girls how to fight. CPT Rogers, really, Romanoff? No, after having Pegashoot at me, not much would surprise me there. Miss Stark, alarmed. Sheshetiu, CPT Rogers, no, she shot Mishield. But still, I knew better than to question women's combat skills after that. Video paused. Mr. Stark, you know, boxing is not the first thing I would have picked for her. Ms. Potts, you box for your self-defense training. Mr. Stark, yeah, beautiful fighting people my own size. Don't get me wrong. I'm proud that she knows how to throw a punch already, even if it's pretty weird how she learned it. MS. Potts, well, if we're going for self-defense, it can't hurt for her to be well-rounded. But I think she'll agree it makes sense to do most of her training with Nat. Mr. Stark looks at Ms. Potts in surprise. Mr. Stark, Nat? Since when is she Nat? Ms. Potts smiles and swiped through the controls on the holoscreen to pull up a different clip. Video clip plays. Ms. Potts is showing Miss Stark the training room while Agent Romanoff is present. Miss Stark, that you for offering to teach me, Agent Romanoff. Agent Romanoff, please, Minnie Stark can call me Nat. Video paused. Mr. Stark, annoyed. It's a conspiracy, I tell you. Mr. Stark swipes to another video clip in the lineup. Video clip plays. Miss Stark is speaking with Dr. Bruce Banner in the laboratory while Agent Romanoff observes. Doctor. Banner is examining a sample under a microscope. Dr. Banner, I can't tell you everything I'm doing. A lot of it's classified. If Tony wants to cross the people in Washington with that, he can do it on his own time. Dr. Banner lean up from his microscope to look at Miss Stark. Doctor. Banner, also, I'm guessing you don't have a background in advanced biochemistry and cybernetics. Miss Stark, you know what those words mean, I think. Dr. Banner, laughing. All right, public version. How much do you know about the battle, Miss Stark? Not a lot besides what Dad showed me. Doctor. Banner, well, did you see how when the mothership was destroyed, all the Chitauri just fell over like the droids in Phantom Menace? Miss Stark. Pause. Yes, it did. Were they really all controlled by the mothership? Dr. Banner, that's what I'm trying to figure out. They're Anatrobots, they're flesh and blood, with what I think are large brains. They should be able to operate independently, and there's really no strategic reason for them not to. Agent Romanoff. In battle, that is. If you're paranoid enough, you won't want them to be able to flip if they're captured. Dr. Banner, which has its own set of uncomfortable implications. So I've been working out how they were controlled. It's not obvious on the surface, but they're full of technology like the Borg. Technology that needs a lot of power to function. Again, that much the public has basically figured out. The question is how much of it is intentional design and how much is them overextending themselves for the sake of firepower. Transcriber's note, Dr. Banner notably avoided the more secret efforts to adapt and/or reverse engineer the Chitauri technology. Miss Stark, oh, that makes sense. Dr. Banner nods, then frowns. Dr. Banner, Tony isn't expecting me to tutor you in science, is he? We both know he can do that just as well himself at a middle school level. Miss Stark, I don't think so. We're still deciding where I'm going to school in the autumn, and the school might have a different curriculum. Agent Romanoff, we're sticking with self-defense for the summer. Doctor. Banner, uncomfortably. Ah, well, that's even less in my wheelhouse. Smashing stuff with super strength isn't going to work for people not named me or Thor. Miss Stark giggles awkwardly. Analysis suggests she was unsure whether it was meant to be a joke. Miss Stark, you know, Dad and I were wondering the other day how you violate conservation of mass. Dr. Banner, oh yeah, Miss Stark. Yeah, he thinks you get the extra mass from another dimension. Dr. Banner shrugs. Dr. Banner, it's as good a guess as any I've been able to come up with. We don't really understand what happens when gamma intensities get that high. Miss Stark, I think it's magic. Dr. Banner laughs loudly. Dr. Banner, right. Pause. I definitely lean toward the first one. Video paused. Ms. Potts, she's definitely your daughter, all right. Mr. Stark, that's a good sign, isn't it? I mean, I wasn't sure if she'd be comfortable around the other Avengers, especially Banner. I don't know if it's good that she's treating him the same as the others, or if she'd worried about her warped sense of danger. MS. Parts, yes. Pause. Andi's, but not because of Bruce. Mr. Stark, seriously. Because of how eager she was to charge into the fight with me at Hogwarts. Yeah, Ms. Potts, but it'll definitely be good for Bruce, not having Harley run and hide from him. And it's good that Harley's comfortable with the team. Mr. Stark, it'll definitely make things easier. It's just that sometimes I'm still not sure if I've got a good read on her. A kid in her position, I wouldn't exactly expect her to trust easily. Ms. Potts sighs and shakes her head. MS. Potts, it's because she trusts you, Tony. You're right. She's gone her whole life without any adults who had her back, even after she befriends some. But then you come flying in as a literal knight in shining armor, in spite of all the reasons not to, actually stento her, and shoot the evil wizard who was trying to kill her in the face. She knows you won't steer her wrong about your teammates. Mr. Stark, uncomfortably. Just when I thought I was getting comfortable with the responsibility. Ms. Potts, hazard of the job, I think, but you've been doing pretty well so far. Mr. Stark swipes to another video clip. Video clip plays. Miss Stark is at the Westside Rifle Pistol Range in a private session with Mr. Stark and LT Carl James Rhodes, recorded from behind the shooting line. LT Carl Rhodes is explaining to Miss Stark how to operate his standard issue Sig Sauer M18 pistol. All three are wearing ear protection. Mr. Stark and LT Carl Rhodes are also wearing eye protection. LT Carl Rhodes, take your time with each shot to adjust to the recoil and safety back on when you're done. Okay, Miss Stark, hesitantly. Okay, LT Carl Rhodes, are those safety glasses? Miss Stark, I don't think so. They're just off the NHS rack. Mr. Stark, incidentally, when's the last time you had your eyes checked? Miss Stark, it must have been 2 years ago now. But these are fine. They're good enough for cricket. LT Carl Rhodes, I'll go find a pair of fit-over safety glasses. LT Carl Rhodes walks out of the frame. Mr. Stark, to Miss Stark. Could I see those? Miss Stark takes off her glasses and hands them to Mr. Stark. Mr. Stark holds them up and looks through them, then startles slightly in surprise. Mr. Stark, oh wow. Mr. Stark leans closer to Miss Stark. Mr. Stark, quietly. Yeah, that's definitely something you got from James. Do ya want some new ones? Miss Stark, I don't know. It would be good to have a pair that's not worn out, but I kind of like these. They're the same style he wore. Mr. Stark hands Miss Stark's glasses back to her. She begins to slip them back on under her ear protectors. Mr. Stark, I'll get you a couple new pairs of lenses anyway. Shatterproof, anti-glare coating, the works. They'll be good to have for your sports career. We can do whatever with the frames. Maybe titanium in the same style, so you can keep the John Lennon look. Miss Stark takes her glasses off again with a surprised expression. She turns them around and examines them from several angles in apparent confusion. After 8 seconds, she shrugs and puts them back on. Lt. Carl Rhodes returns and hands Miss Stark a pair of safety goggles. She puts them on over her glasses. Lt. Carl Rhodes, are you ready? Miss Stark, I think so. Lt. Carl Rhodes, okay, let's try it. Just 5 shots to start with. Lt. Carl Rhodes steps up to the firing line, loads his pistol and steps back again. Lt. Carl Rhodes, loudly. Range is hot. Miss Stark steps up to the firing line, picks up the pistol, takes her stance, and adjusts her grip while pointing it downrange. Lt. Carl Rhodes, safety off. Miss Stark turns off the safety on the pistol. She lines up her first shot and fires. She startles at the loudness of the sound and the amount of recoil, and she appears to nearly drop the pistol, but she quickly recovers and regains her grip. After looking downrange at the target for 5 seconds, she adjusts her aim slightly and fires 4 more times. After each of her subsequent shots, she flinches slightly, but recovers her aim quickly. After the 5th shot, she begins to set the pistol down, but stops and flips the safety on before setting it down fully. Lt. Carl Rhodes steps forward and unloads the gun. Lt. Carl Rhodes, loudly, ceasefire. Pause. Range is cold. Lt. Carl Rhodes recalls Miss Stark's target into view and examines it. 4 of Miss Stark's shots are in the black rings, including 2 on the center bull's. He makes an impressed whistling sound. Transcriber's note. Miss Stark later confirmed that her first shot was the one not in the black, after which she successfully adjusted her aim. The range to target was 20 yards. Lt. Carl Rhodes, 44 out of 50. I've seen cadets do worse than that. Pause. Hell, I've seen full-fledged airmen do worse than that if they're slacking. Video paused. Mr. Stark, hand-eye coordination of the youngest seeker in a century. Ms. Potts, apparently so. And you said she was flying like a pro the first time she rode a broomstick. Mr. Stark. Her teacher didn't say pro, but she'd say twice Holly's age. And with no training, it's got to be at least as hard as riding a bike for the first time, even if she doesn't have the problems we did. Ms. Potts, it's almost like she picks up skills the way you pick up new fields of science. Mr. Stark. Pause. You know, that could be the common thread. She got the fast learning gene and applied it in a completely different direction. Ms. Potts, if there is such a thing, Mr. Stark, hey, stranger things have happened. Mr. Stark swipes to another video clip. Video clip plays. Agent Clint Barton is doing target practice in the training room while Miss Stark and Ms. Potts watch. Transcriber's note. Based on the pattern of shots, it appears that Agent Barton was attempting to split an arrow, a difficult and heavily luck-based feat, even for him. Agent Barton, you want to learn how to shoot my bow? Miss Stark nods. Agent Barton shakes his head. Agent Barton, the movies always get it wrong. Archery isn't a dexterity-based skill, or itis, beauteet's just as much a strength-based one. Even with a modern compound bow, it takes a lot of force to pull back the string, and if you can't hold it steady, you're not gonna hit anything. I could show you the basics, but not with this bow, and you probably won't be ready for a real weapon for a couple more years. Miss Stark is visibly disappointed. Ms. Potts, have you taught your kids to shoot? Transcriber's note. By this point, MS. Potts and Miss Stark had been informed about Agent Barton's family as part of making plans for the summer. Agent Barton. Nah, they haven't shown interest in anything but the little suction cup version yet, and I promised Laura I wouldn't push it until they're 13. Ms. Parts, well, maybe you could let Holly try it out, just so she can see how much upper body strength she needs. Agent Barton looks appraisingly at Miss Stark. Agent Barton, you want to take a shot? All right, knock yourself out. Kid Agent Barton offers his bow and an arrow to Miss Stark. Miss Stark immediately smiles and takes them. Agent Barton motions to Ms. Potts to stand directly behind her. Analysis suggests he expected a very wide miss. Miss Stark lines up in front of the target and attempts to draw the bow. She frowns at the amount of resistance she encounters and struggles to pull it past half-draw. When her hands begin visibly shaking, she lets off some of the tension and adjusts her aim. Then she draws and immediately looses the arrow, appearing to release it the moment she reaches the limit of her strength. The arrow sticks in the three-point black ring of the target. Agent Barton, surprised. I didn't see that coming. Video paused. Ms. Parts coordinated, stubborn and can improvise in a pinch. Mr. Stark. Yet she probably could Barton's apprentice if she wanted. And the thing is, it really would good practice for her. Magic spells tend to move more at the speed of an arrow, from what I've seen. Ms. Parts, that's probably not something you need to worry about too much. The way she talks about school, I bet she'll want to go into some kind of magical field. Mr. Stark. I know I'm hoping for a magical field that I can science out properly. MS. Parts, please, you'll be right there rooting for her if she plays professional Quidditch, too. Mr. Stark. Well, sure, but I'm still hoping for something I can do science to. Pause. And something a little more practical if evil wizards come after her again. Mr. Stark swipes to another video clip. Video clip plays. Miss Stark is in the training room with Agents Romanoff and Barton. Agent Romanoff grabs Miss Stark by shoulders and walks her through a judo flip maneuver several times in a row. Agent Romanoff, hold my elbow with your left hand, step between my feet, right arm under my shoulder, lean forward, and then you want to pivot back to facing forward and pull with that left arm. If you do it right, you'll roll me across your back and onto the floor. All right, Miss Stark. Okay. Agent Romanoff, again. Hold with your left, step between my feet, right arm under my shoulder, lean forward and pivot. That last part needs to be all at once to build up enough the momentum. Do you have all that, Miss Stark? I think so. Agent Romanoff, okay, one more time, a little faster. Left hand, step forward, right arm lean forward and pivot, good. Now let's see if you can do all that in one motion. Agent Romanoff and Miss Stark get back in the starting position. Then, Miss Stark performs the flip successfully, throwing Agent Romanoff onto the floor. Video paused. Mr. Stark, you know, even if it's just for training, it's nice to see someone finally put Romanoff on the mat. Ms. Potts, I'm not sure if Happy will be thrilled or terrified that Holly could do it to him, too. Mr. Stark, he'll act annoyed, but I think he'll secretly be glad the kid he's protecting knows a few moves. Video resumes. Miss Stark offers a hand to Agent Romanoff, and she pulls herself to her feet. Agent Romanoff, that was pretty good for a first try. I've seen people just fall over when they try that. You might have a natural talent for this. Miss Stark, eagerly, like you. Agent Romanoff shakes her head and smiles with visible discomfort. Agent Romanoff, you have to start younger than you are to wind up like me. And it's not a path I'd recommend if you can help it. Video paused. Mr. Stark, a sigh. Do you think I'm pushing her too hard, Pepper? Ms. Potts, no. She's just trying everything to see what she likes. She seems to be enjoying it so far. Mr. Stark, pause. Then do you think she's pushing herself too hard? She's never had a real childhood if her relatives are any indication, and this is already a busy summer with the school visits, the experiments, Ms. Potts, the Olympics. I think lots of British kids would love to be going to those. Pause. American kids too, but that's beside the point. If you're worried about giving Holly a chance to be a kid, I think she's doing pretty well for herself. Besides, didn't she say she thought defending against dark magic, or whatever it's called, sounded interesting before any of the trouble she went through? Face it, Tony. You've got an athlete on your hands, and I don't think she's going to stop with Quidditch. I bet she'll pick up judo or whatever witches do instead of judo. Mr. Stark. Jarvis, is there anything in the books about magic martial arts? Jarvis, pause. Information about modern-day practices is limited, sir, but based on correlating references among the available books, it appears that the only magical martial art of any note is competitive dueling. Mr. Stark, concerned. Dueling. Like full-on wizard's duel, no purple dragons, kind of stuff. Jarvis, the books indicate that animal transformation is a very rare practice. As for the sport, it appears to originate from traditional European honor duels, but it has since evolved into a regulated martial art in a manner similar to fencing. One of Miss Stark's letters mentioned a rumor that her charms teacher, Professor Flitwick, was a former dueling champion. Mr. Stark Flitwick, really? I met him. Guy was tiny. Had a funny sense of humor, and he looked like he'd be more at home in a library, and I just described Yoda, didn't I? Ms. Potts laughs. Mr. Stark, okay, I'll mark that one plausible. A sigh. Well, if Shadow stake it up, that'll probably be the best training she can get for facing another evil wizard if I don't take care of them first. Ms. Potts, any luck on the magic-proof armor? Mr. Stark, not without more to work with from the scans. With the gamma emission, a tungsten lining on the shield might help, but it's heavy. That might even be part of the reason gold's so important. I'd put good odds on Roger's shield blocking that killing curse without a scratch, but I don't know if that would save it from being transfigured into tinfoil. Not sure if there's much to do besides start testing back home. MS. Parts, well, after last time, you should have plenty of time for that before there's any more trouble. Mr. Stark, I hope so. Chapter 151, 20 July, Harley's Diary. From the Diary of Harley Stark. 20 July, I can talk to snakes, and I'm still not 100 sure Dad believes me about it. I mean, he must do. I'm being silly. We figured out some convincing evidence eventually, and we found enough stuff in the history books. But he really thought I was playing a prank on him at the time. The thing is, I already knew I could do it. I just didn't think anything of it because I didn't know it was weirder than usual. It's what happened when I set that python on Dudley last year. Dad wanted to get out more this summer, so he decided we should go to the San Diego Zoo today. The zoo was nice. It's 3 times the size of the London Zoo and has more than twice as many species, according to Jarvis. And it went well except when we got to the reptile walk. We saw them feeding the Komodo dragons, and one of them said to the other, 2 legs are weird. Why do they always kill the food before they give them to us? And I told it, well, it's easier to fit them in the icebox that way. I didn't think anyone was close enough to hear who shouldn't, or at least who could record it. Happy was keeping them away. But the people who could hear looked at me like I was being weird. I thought it was just because I was talking to the lizards, but then Dad said I was hissing. And of course I said, no, I wasn't. And that's probably why he thought it was a prank, because I really was hissing. I just didn't notice somehow. When we got inside the reptile house, that's when I remembered the snake from London, and I started trying to talk to the snakes in there just so I could convince Dad. Most of them weren't very talkative, and they only said things like, go away. I'm trying to sleep. They didn't really move much at all, probably because they're cold-blooded, but a few of them talked to me. Dad kept saying I was only hissing at them, but Heck could hear them hissing back. When we got home, we looked at the books and figured I must have been speaking Parseltongue, which is a magical snake language. But I don't understand how that's possible. It just sounded like English to me, and I couldn't even do it again at home unless I was looking at a picture of a snake. Well, it mostly sounded like English. There was a really mean green mamba who was saying things like, back off, 2 legs, or I'll shathark you. I'm not sure how to translate shathark. It's a word for what its venom does, which is mainly paralyzing and suffocating. But I also got the feeling it's a swear word. And I have no idea how I know any of that. I still didn't notice I was speaking another language, except for the odd word like Shathark, that doesn't translate properly, and I'd finitella shouldn't know anything about translating words I've never heard before. It still took a while for Dad to believe me at the zoo. He asked me to ask one of the snakes to tell me something only they would know, but I have no idea what kinds of things a snake could tell me that we could prove. Then he asked if I could tell one to crawl in a figure eight. It took a while to find one that would listen to me, but the king cobra did when I asked it nicely. Since that was the first one who really did anything at all, I think that was when he finally believed me. The king cobra was surprisingly nice. When it was done, I told it, "Thank you. You're a very polite snake," it said. "We each have our own side of the wall. As long as we have that, my only quarrel is with the lesser serpents that are my dinner." Creepy, but at least you know where you stand with it, I guess. After that, Dad wanted me to see if I could understand any other animals, but I couldn't. I couldn't even understand most of the other lizards. They had a glass lizard, and I couldn't understand it either, even though it looks like a snake. I think it might be that it only works with animals that have forked tongues. According to History of Magic and Hogwarts, a history, parcel tongue, is a rare magical ability that Salazar Slytherin had, and it might not be a good thing because it's associated with dark witches and wizards. Slytherin doesn't have a great reputation anymore either, even though there's a Hogwarts house named for him. Dad insists it can't be bad by itself, but maybe I shouldn't tell people about it. He's sending a letter to Headmaster Fontaine at Ilvermorny to ask if he knows anything. You can get it there faster by sending it by Muggle post to the Large. Oh, and now Dad wants to get a snake and put it in an MRI machine to figure out how it works because snakes shouldn't be smart enough to use language. But Pepper said, "No, I draw the line at snakes." Chapter 152, 25 July, Project Logs. Excerpts from logs for Project Glinda descriptions and notes on magical items investigated up through July 25, 2012. Item 12A. Replacement pewter collapsible cauldron for destructive testing. Impact test. Cauldron bent and dented when bashed against the corner of a table when in open position. Rim was easily scored with a hacksaw. After several more impacts, the pewter tore as the protective enchantments presumably failed. Tear was not along the seams, but the seams popped easily once the structure was compromised. Seams appear to be as strong as the solid metal as long as the cauldron is in one piece. Item 12B. Copper cauldron. Solid, non-collapsible. Self-stirring, corrosion-resistant, certified 99.9 pure, typical of high-quality, non-electrical applications. Sold with a thin, round-tipped stirring rod and a thick pestle, both also copper, the pestle being hollow. Capacity, 2 American quarts. Memo. The other pewter cauldron also had a capacity in American quarts. If Holly's returning to Hogwarts, we need to buy a replacement for her in London. PP brass and bronze cauldrons were also available. Functional differences appear minor at a beginner level. Instructions list several categories of potions that should not be brewed in the cauldron because of reactions with the copper, most prominently nutrition potions. Copper degrades vitamin C, but shouldn't affect other nutrients. Instructions warn against placing cauldron on a gas burner for dry base or calcination, processes with which Miss Stark is unfamiliar. They are mentioned in an appendix to magical drafts and potions addressing non-water-based potions. However, the cauldron is advertised as able to be used on a wood fire or as a fire pan, despite being the wrong shape for it. When a stirring implement is held in the cauldron and released, it repeats any motions performs on a continuous loop. Maximum memory appears to be 20 seconds. Repeats only motions performs while the stirrer is held in the hand in the cauldron. User does not need to have magic. Works for Mr. Stark. Works when handled through Miss Stark's dragonhide gloves. Works when handled through Mr. Stark's gauntlets. Doesn't work when handled by a robotic arm, even if it's directly human-piloted, because of course it can't be that easy. Doesn't work if more than one stirrer is held in the cauldron simultaneously. Instructions warn that self-stirring feature may not work as intended if the included implements are not used. Self-stirring is partially based on the tool used. Stirring rod only works in liquids. Pestle only works on solids. No tools self-stir if cauldron is empty. Self-stirring magic appears to be attached to the cauldron only. Stirring rod is inert when placed in a different cauldron. A socket wrench self-stirs when placed in the copper cauldron. So does a wooden spoon. A hammerhead does nothing. Not sufficiently stirrer-shaped. Item 19. Wizarding wireless receiver set, a radio that picks up magical broadcasts. Description: resembles a transistor radio from the 1960s, but does not correspond to any known brand or model. Picks up non-magic AM and FM radio stations, although reception is poorer than average. Sound is generated by a speaker cone like a non-magic radio. Interior contains circuitry for some definition of the word. See attached diagram. Includes something like a circuit board, but only appears to be there for structural support. Includes a coil of wire that serves as an antenna. Wire is lacquered copper and looks like it could have come from a non-magic hardware store. What should the power source appears to be a large piezoelectric quartz crystal that presumably runs on magic and does not need to be replaced or recharged, even after more than a week of continuous operation. No detectable outside source of the energy. Honestly not certain if the mode of operation is electrical or mechanical. Amplifier circuitry consists of an array of smaller crystals. X-ray fluorescence shows the crystals are galena and pyrite with some surfaces silvered, and they're arranged in a circuit that technically comprises several working bipolar junction transistors. What the hell? Whoever designed this thing was a mad genius. If they're still alive, I need to talk to them. It's like they took apart a crystal radio and somehow rederived semiconductor theory from a completely set of first principles. Brings a new meaning to the phrase, magic crystals. Possible in for a better understanding of magical theory. Needs more investigation. Efforts to duplicate the circuitry from non-magical materials underway. Operation. Controls are functionally identical to a non-magic ampham transistor radio. Upon investigation, magical stations appear to be placed in between non-magic ones and use non-Latin alphabets for call signs. None of the stations have any identifiable connection with corresponding Latin alphabet call signs. All magical stations detected broadcast in both AM and FM frequencies corresponding to the same location on the dial. Magical stations are heard more clearly, even when there should be interference from nearby non-magic stations. Magical stations are also received at a far greater range than non-magic ones, but they themselves rarely interfere with nearby non-magic stations. A non-magical radio tuned to a magical station sometimes picks up identifiable snatches of magical dialogue. However, most of the time, it records only static. Reason for the leakage, unknown. Efforts to correlate it with weather patterns underway. Efforts to extract known segments of programming from the static have failed thus far. No evidence of any encryption or scrambling that is accessible to a society without computers. Broadcast programming. Each detected magical station was recorded for 24 hours. See attached files. Summary below. Stations detected in New York. Stations detected in Malibu. Item 20. Color-changing robe, size to fit Mr. Stark. Wizard's robe that appears to be in a standard style based on our limited exposure. Made of linen and advertised as suitable for warm weather. Has 2 sets of broad stripes, 5 cm 2, in wide that shift in color and rotate relative to each other, forming changing kaleidoscopic patterns. Hypothesized that dye would flow over the threads in a manner similar to magical photos. However, microscopy suggesting the colors are doing the more sensible thing of changing in place. Laser diffraction suggests the presence of changing nanoparticles similar to the color-shifting ink, but unlike the ink, these continue to shift permanently even though the dye has dried. Physical sample extraction. A 10 cm, 4-inch square was cut from a corner of the robe. The pattern shifting on the sample stopped working correctly almost immediately, with the stripes no longer rotating and instead wobbling back and forth through a small angle. Pattern shifting and color changing both slowed and stopped over several hours, and the edges of the stripes became blurry, leaving a rough pattern of dull, muddy colors after 24 hours. See attached photos. The remainder of the robe remained fully functional except for the first few millimeters alongside the cut, where the pattern becomes blurred out. Affected area did not increase in size after 24 hours. Mass spectrometry carried out on the sample. Chemical profile is typical for dyed linen. See attached spectrum. Several possible materials for the nanoparticles identified, but none conclusively. Attempts to isolate individual nanoparticles from the robe are ongoing. Reattachment test. The cut section was reattached to the robe with a non-magic sewing machine. Color changing resumed in the cut section within minutes, but imperfectly, remaining as shifting, blurry splotches. Robes that shift only in pattern and not color added to the shopping list. Ask about methods for creation. Repairing the robe with magic added to the list to ask Agent Koenig. Item 21. Potions purchased from Slug Jigger's apothecary. Hair-raising potion and fire-breathing potion acquired. Skill grow potion requested, but denied on the grounds that it requires a prescription. Human testing deferred after we realized we don't have a fast way to get to a magical hospital if something goes wrong. Animal testing vetoed by Ms. Potts. Mass spectrometry carried out on both samples. See attached spectra. Both potions contain a cocktail of organic compounds in aqueous solution, many of which are unidentified. Not clear which, if any of them, are associated with magical effects. Correlating potions recipes with the chemical compositions of the end products would be a very complex project. May require more advanced texts describing the theory of potions and sampling intermediate brewing products. Item 22. Assorted candy from Hansel Gretel's candy store in New York. Note, someone has an interesting sense of humor. General survey of products. Products differ significantly from those available in the UK, with few exceptions such as chocolate frogs. Candy seems to fall in three broad, non-exclusive categories. Categories may overlap. The enchanted sugar berries may be an example of all three. They pop, like bubbles when eaten, in a way that their physical structure shouldn't allow, have a fruity center that is not evident from their physical structure, and feature uncommon berry flavors like lignanberry and cloudberry. Additional testing deferred. At this point, I don't know if we're going to get much without a better understanding of magical theory and/or theory of potions. Textbook authors have probably never thought about the science angle. Need to talk to experts in person. Item 23. Golden Snitch, caught by Miss Stark in the Hogwarts Quidditch Cup final and gifted to Mr. Stark. Said to be designed in imitation of the endangered golden snidget, a small bird which it replaced in Quidditch games in 1355. Structure: a gold-colored sphere with a textured surface. 2 silver wings are attached to ball joints on the body. Wings are thick wires with a line of trailing feather-shaped ribbons attached. Wings are able to disappear when furled against the body. Diameter: 3.02 cm, likely meant to be 1 316 in. Weight: 15.55 g, likely meant to be 240 grains. Weight is comparable to a flesh and blood animal of the same size. Composition: based on X-ray fluorescence. Body is 18-karat gold, alloyed with silver. Wings are sterling silver. Has to be magically reinforced. For a gold ball to be that light, it would have to be as thin as an eggshell. If I wanted to replicate it, I'd use gold-plated aluminum. X-rays confirm a thin shell, including on the textured part. Non-magical crafting method would probably be to beat a gold sheet into shape in 2 halves around a clay mold. Unknown how much of the process is replaced by magic. Locomotion: High-speed footage shows that the wing motion is functionally equivalent to that of a hummingbird. Behavior. When released, it hovers around the holder, gradually venturing farther and faster away from the holder. When released in the garage, it takes up a pattern of circling the garage at a typical throwing speed. Miss Stark is able to recall the snitch to her hand on command, similar to her broomstick, although Mr. Stark and Ms. Potts cannot. Very different from its behavior in-game, where it takes off at high speeds immediately and actively evades players. Notes based on Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Themen Quidditch Through the Ages. Description of the golden snidget resembles a hummingbird except for the spherical body, despite no hummingbirds being native to the Eastern Hemisphere. Hummingbirds are known to reach 50 km/h, 30 mph, in level flight and twice that speed in a dive. This may be comparable to the speeds of flying brooms before the development of standardized, professionally manufactured models in the late 1800s. The Silver Arrow, invented c. 1900, was described as having a top speed of 70 miles an hour with a tailwind, and was a significant improvement over earlier models. The snitch is described as being little changed since its invention. Unclear if this is poor scholarship, and it has been redesigned in recent years, or if it adapts to the skill of the players and was always capable of keeping up with far faster brooms than the ones of its time. Miss Stark is unaware of any difference between snitches used in school and professional games, and even in school games, the Seeker's brooms may have significantly different performance from one game to the next. Suggests the snitch is able to adapt to the game situation. Item 24. Abyssinian shrivelfig plant, a type of fig with magical properties. Selected for investigation as a strictly magical plant with presumed close non-magical relatives. Description: resembles a small, ornamental fig tree. Currently does not show obvious differences from non-magic fig trees, given that the fruit isn't in season. Description of the fruit does not match known fig species, said to be bright purple with a wrinkled texture. Fruit and leaves are said to have magical medicinal properties that other fig species don't. DNA test, conducted by Shield under a cover story, confirmed as an undocumented species of fig tree. No obvious genetic components that correspond to magical properties. Item 25. Flitterbloom plant, a plant of uncertain provenance with tendrils that wave in the air. Selected for investigation as a plant with obvious magical properties and no obvious close relatives. Description: appears as a cluster of short vines that wave back and forth in the air. Vines are approximately 45 cm, 18 in, long at the longest and non-woody, but non-leaf-bearing. Vines are round, but have 2 rows of serrations running down their lengths, similar to the leaves Ophalo and agave species. Behavior: vines wave at speeds ranging from 10 to 40 times per minute, depending on light, temperature, and airflow levels, increasing to as high as 120 times per minute for a few seconds if physically disturbed. When offered a trellis to climb, usually only one vine will hold on to it, as if for support, while the others will sway in noticeably wider arcs. 1,000 magical herbs and fungi describes the vines as tentacles and notes that they neither flit nor bloom, despite the name. No obvious biological use for the vine motion. Plant shows no carnivorous tendencies. Could maybe attract pollinators, but would be a very odd adaptation for that purpose. Unknown if the plant was artificially bred, but seems likely. Also, it shouldn't be able to get enough energy for constant movement. Must use magic somehow, but don't have enough theory to speculate. Lack of leaves on the vine suggests a succulent plant, but no further visual classification can be made. Dissection: microscopic sections of the vines show no signs of animal tissue to generate the movement. Voltage differences across cell walls match those found in other plants, which are capable of triggering movement. Behavior under low voltage electrical stimulation indicates that the motion is hydraulic, with active parts of the vines extended with hydrostatic pressure and shortening when relaxed. The same mechanism has been documented in the carnivorous sundew plant. DNA test conducted by Shield under a cover story. Well, it turns out they're not vinesaur tentacles, theraphrons. Identified as an undocumented and highly derived species, often in the drought-adapted subfamily Chaelenthordae. No genes from carnivorous plants detected. Speculate that the waving was produced by magically enhancing normal sun tracking and climbing responses. Item 26. Unicorn horn, said to be ethically acquired from an individual that died of natural causes. Description: horn is conical in shape, 47 cm, 18.5 in long and 5 cm 2 in wide at the base, with a spiral ridge along its length. Weight: 554 g, 19.6 Rs. Density is much higher than normal dried bone, and in some ways it more closely resembles ivory. Color is a semi-metallic silver-white. The keratin sheath typical of true horns is absent, but it is not clear if it was removed after death or was never present. The tip of the horn is worn as if it has been used for digging or scraping. Microscopy. Microstructure is broadly similar to bone, but the gaps are much more filled in and calcification is extremely high. Appears to be structurally bone rather than tooth, wasn't certain for a minute there, but heavily modified. Composition. Raman spectroscopy. 85-hydroxyapatite, in between the levels in bone and tooth enamel, 15 organic molecules consistent with structural biomolecular complexes. X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy. Contains abnormally high levels of various metals, most prominently silver. As seen with the unicorn hair, the levels of barium are very high. Would have to be getting it from some kind of mineral lick. Barium is chemically similar to the calcium in bones, but the more common strontium is less abundant here. Gamma-ray spectroscopy. Tried it on a hunch, and it paid off. Contains 45 BQ of radium. Barely detectable, but suggests very efficient uptake of radium from the environment. No way. It couldn't be. Mass spectrometry, and there it is. The chemical similarity was the clue. The horn contains 150 ppb of vibranium. Analysis. Vibranium salts are present at low ppb levels in rocks and soil in many parts of the world, comparable to gold and platinum, but unlike other rare elements, mineable deposits only occur in one place: Wakanda. Levels of vibranium in the horn are high enough that it seems evolved specifically to incorporate it, but they're too low to enhance its strength. Suggests they originally evolved in a part of the world that has higher vibranium levels, which seems impossible. Miss Stark verified that the unicorn specifically resembles a horse and not a rhinoceros, antelope, goat, or wild ass, to which the non-magical unicorn legend has been variously attributed. Horse suggests an origin in Central Asia. Earliest classical attestations of the unicorn place it in India. Accounts are too ancient for them to have been produced artificially by any known historical East African power. Could there be other sources of vibranium? Maybe ask Dumbledore about uses of vibranium in alchemy. He knew about celestium, after all. Transcriber's note. After Albus Dumbledore identified the element in Mr. Stark's arc reactor as celestial gold, among other names, Mr. Stark withdrew his name application for badassium and proposed a new name of celestium, which was more favorably received by the scientific community. Item 27. Double-ended salamander, a salamander with two heads at opposite ends of its body. Named catdog by Mr. Stark. Description: closely resembles an adult tiger salamander. Weight: 155 g, 5.5 Rs. Total length: 25.5 cm, 10 in. Length from nose tip to the opposite pair of legs is 19.5 cm, 7.5 in. 30 longer than the nose to vent length of a normal specimen. Span between the two pairs of legs is 50 longer than a normal specimen. X-ray imaging does not show signs of being conjoined twins. Completely lacks hind legs or even a pelvis, but has fully formed digestive and excretory systems, a shared reproductive system, and a shared cloaca directly in the middle of the body. Internal anatomy is heavily modified, with lungs and digestive tracts being 30 smaller than normal, likely as a result of each set only needing to provide for half of the animal. Behavior: similar to a normal tiger salamander, but will randomly reverse direction of movement periodically. Locomotion is more efficient than having two pairs of front legs pointing in opposite directions would suggest. Heads appear to be independent, but work efficiently in concert. Often need 1–2 seconds of jockeying over which direction to move, but rarely fight over it for longer periods. Rear head will react to stimuli visible only to the front head with a small but measurable delay of 200–300 milliseconds, fast enough to suggest direct stimulation by nerve signals. Reversible motion provides an advantage in being able to escape quickly when startled. DNA test conducted by Shield under a cover story. Close match to the tiger salamander. No obvious magic genes, but the Hox genes that determine body plan are scrambled, with several groups being duplicated and inverted, and the genes for the tail entirely absent. May be possible with non-magic gene editing, but would need a horrific amount of trial and error, and likely would not produce such well-organized behavior. Item 28. Puffskein, a small domestic animal that seriously looks like a tribble. Named Scotty by Mr. Stark. Puffskeins are much older than media depictions of tribbles. Query started to search for any influence of wizards on the design of the tribble. Description: plump, round body that with the fur gives it a spherical appearance from most angles, although underneath it has a more traditional mammalian body plan. Weight: 950 g, 2 lb, 2 Rs. Body length: about 20 cm, 8 in. I think. Hard to get a clear measurement with that shape. Head is not well differentiated from the body, with a short and relatively immobile neck. Face is flat and cat-like, with large, forward-facing eyes. Also purrs like a cat or a tribble when petted. Ears are small and round and normally hidden by the fur. Tongue is long and thin like an anteater's. Fur is long, fluffy, and custard-colored. Has a layer of subcutaneous fat that makes it soft, with less prominent bones than similar animals. Can walk or hop on short, stumpy legs that make it look like a stuffed animal. No external tail. Also bears a resemblance to the fictional haggis animal. The haggis animal is fictional, right? Transcribers note, this resemblance is why Mr. Stark chose Scotty as its name over the other characters. Diet: omnivorous. Described as a scavenger able to tolerate a highly varied diet and thrive on table scraps, but will also hunt arthropods. When offered a feeder cricket, it used its tongue more like a chameleon's than an anteater's to capture it. Is also said to lick mucus out of humans' noses. Testing refused by all parties. Distribution said to be global, but that's as a domestic animal. Flat face and large eyes are hallmarks of intensive selective breeding, although feral populations are reported to exist. As it is now, appears adapted for a cold climate. Not clear if it ever had a wild form or what it was. Behavior: about as playful as its body shape allows. Readily cuddles with humans when handled. Claimed to tolerate being thrown about. Testing deferred. Engages with enrichment activities designed for rodents and rabbits, but cat toys turned out to be a bad idea because it just tries to eat them. Anatomy: pretty standard mammal, although it's hard to say more than that for certain. X-rays show the legs are not as stumpy as they appear, with the upper legs being folded against the body. Wasn't obvious at first, but that's got to be how they hop. Spine has a permanent convex curve and appears unable to straighten, contributing to the round body shape. Skeleton appears robust for its size. Skull is round and looks less overbred than the flat face would suggest. Doesn't have the mangled jaw of a pug or the drooping eye sockets of a Persian. 22 teeth, with prominent incisors and no canines. Reproduction: fortunately Dosnathave the tribble's reproductive rate. From the description, breeding is broadly similar to other mammals of similar size. Care: said to be easy to care for. doesn't need a specialized diet, and can allegedly handle rough play. But hygiene is going to be a problem. With that body shape, it can't clean itself, and with the long hair and folded up legs, it's going to need regular washing. DNA test conducted by Shield under a cover story. It's a damn rabbit. Correction. It cannot be conclusively identified as a rabbit, but it is certainly a lagomorph. It may be an offshoot of the pika genus. Body size is on the small end for rabbits, but larger than any pika species. Body shape is an obvious match. Tooth count reduced from 26 for pikas or 28 for rabbits. Gap between incisors and molars in other lagomorphs is nearly absent, accommodating a shorter skull. Most lagomorphs are strict herbivores, but the collared pika of Alaska is known to supplement its diet with meat. Tongue and other non-lagomorph features do not appear to have been shaped by introducing genes from other species. Speculate that magical selective breeding may be able to push far beyond non-magic techniques. Item 29. Transforming rabbit. A rabbit thatens into a top hat and back at frequent intervals. Named Harvey by Ms. Potts. Description. Rabbit appears to be an otherwise normal white Netherland dwarf, small enough to easily hide within the hat as an adult. Weight, 1090 g, 2 lb 6.5 Rs. Head and body length, 27 cm, 10.5 in. Behavior, when idle, will often change form every few seconds. Transforms to hat form immediately when startled, possibly a form of camouflage. Will stay in hat form longer when worn on the head, but will still randomly change back after a few minutes or when disturbed by rapid movement. Stays in rabbit form longer when eating and when engaged in play enrichment. Rapid transformation, possibly a sign of boredom or stress. Appears to stay in hat form for longer periods while sleeping, but also exhibits long periods in rabbit form while sleeping. Hat to rabbit transformation. Hat normally sits upright on a flat surface and will spontaneously pop up into the air when changing with an accompanying popping sound. Change occurs in 200–700 milliseconds, with the rabbit appearing to drop out of the hat and land on its front feet. If the hat is placed sideways or upside down, the rabbit appears toe up out of it. In either case, the hat seems to collapse and disappear in a way that the human eye can't follow. High-speed footage shows the hat folding inside out to become the rabbit's skin, with the brim becoming the tail, although details are obscured by the tail hair. Efforts to record the interior of the hat during the transformation failed. The interior appears pitch black except for the rabbit part, even when bright lights are shined down the barrel. Rabbit to hat transformation, much faster, occurring in only 20–40 milliseconds with a higher pitched snapping sound. Appears as only a blur to the naked eye or even in 60 FPS video footage. High-speed footage, data expunged, footage deleted at the request of Miss Stark and Ms. Potts. Footage showed the rabbiting inside out from the head end. Insides appeared entirely as black silk, but even that was disturbing enough. After viewing the footage, Miss Stark retched loudly into a waste basket, and Ms. Potts excused herself to the bathroom. Memo. Ask if Agent Koenig can do memory modification. Or if S.H.I.E.L.D. has invented brain bleach. Yet, HS the transformation appears as a blur in still camera photos, even if the exposure time is much shorter than the transformation speed. Intentional magical effect to avoid that, which simply can't accommodate video. Notably, the head became the hat brim in this transformation. Hat anatomy does not appear to correspond one-to-one with rabbit anatomy. Tests on hat material. Attempts to take blood or tissue samples from the animal in hat form failed, with it immediately reverting to rabbit form and attempting to escape. Attempts to sedate the animal in hat form with an aerosolized anesthetic failed, with it reverting to rabbit form. Combined with the sleep behavior, suggests a certain amount of effort is needed to maintain the hat form, and it is not able to do so in deep sleep. Finally managed to pluck a thread from the hat while in an apparent sleeping state using a hat pin. Hypothesized that the intent of the implement might matter. Thread immediately reverted to a rabbit hair upon removal, despite it being from the exterior of the hat, which should be thainted off the rabbit. DNA test on rabbit form, conducted by Shield under a cover story. It's a rabbit. I don't know what I was expecting. Memo. Maybe we should start using a more organized system than just item numbers, TS. Chapter 153, 28 July, Interlude, Tony. They returned to Hogwarts on Saturday. Friday, of course, was the opening ceremony of the Olympics, and Tony could tell Harley had had a ball. They had plans to attend some of the events as well, but they had other business to take care of in Britain first. This time, Dumbledore was informed they were coming. Harley had sent Hedwig to him as soon as they landed, and he replied promptly. He had sent Professor McGonagall to meet them at their hotel, and Pepper got to meet her for the first time, something that made Tony a little bit nervous, given their attitudes. McGonagall gave Tony and Pepper anti-Muggle charms, apparently standard issue for all Muggle parents of Hogwarts students, which let them see through the concealment that normally hid magic from them. Tony was already itching to go back home and scan them properly. Who knew what clues he could get from those? But he was going to have to wait for that. McGonagall had also finally explained magical transportation to them properly. Harley had tried, but she just didn't have enough background for it. Apparition was the most flexible in that it meant teleportation directly from point to point, but it also had the most restrictions. You could only apparate places you had been before or could see directly, and even then only within a few 100 miles. Most buildings were warded against apparating into them, including Stark Mansion and Avengers Tower. It was advised not to take passengers except in cases of emergency. And even solo, you weren't allowed to do it until you were 17 due to the risk of losing body parts, which, although McGonagall assured them wasn't nearly as bad as it sounded, still sounded very bad. It was difficult enough that even many witches and wizards Hockadapparat often preferred not to. The flu network was safer. It allowed you to teleport directly from house to house as easily as making a phone call. But both houses had to have fireplaces connected to the network, and it was trivially easy for people to screen their calls. Also, public flus would get you within walking distance of most places worth going, but they were generally only open during business hours. The night bus offered the greatest flexibility, as it could teleport point to point anywhere in the country at any time of day and take passengers. But it was first come, first served, so it wasn't instant and could even take a couple hours at particularly busy times. McGonagall also said it was a bit of a bumpy ride. And enough, those methods worked across international borders. You had to either use Muggle methods or go to the Ministry of Magic and register yet another form of teleportation called a portkey. Those could go point to point anywhere in the world at the cost of going through the government and reportedly a much greater risk of lingering motion sickness. Tony, of course, could get to Hogwarts by air, but Harley and Pepper couldn't. If they wanted to go together, he had to leave his suit behind. McGonagall wasn't confident it could go through the fireplace safely, and he couldn't even set it to autopilot because he couldn't be sure the autopilot would get through the wards without crashing. For this trip, they took the public flu from the Leaky Cauldron in London to another pub called the Three Broomsticks in Hogsmeade. The flu trip might have been the first bad sign. Pepper was not prepared for the disappearing into a pillar of green fire pot, and to be honest, Tony and Harley weren't either. Still, after McGonagall demonstrated it to them, Harley hesitantly stepped forward and grabbed a handful of flu powder. She spoke the address clearly and got out at the correct destination at least, but she tripped on the dismount and shot out of the fireplace in the Three Broomsticks at speed on her ass. Or arse, as it were. Pepper, for her part, stayed on her feet, but she stumbled out screaming and nearly knocked Harley over before she caught herself. Tony technically had decent form, but he nearly panicked at the non-Euclidean motion, spinning around in a circle when he emerged and taking up a combat stance, breathing hard before he slowly relaxed. On the way back, we're taking the bus, he said. You won't like it any better, Mr. Stark, McGonagall warned. She led them through the village to the train station and the carriage stand next to it. Hogsmeade seemed to be laid out in a semicircle around the station, with the business district closest to it, which was also the closest point to Hogwarts, while the houses were farther away. Thus, the distance they had to walk was only a few blocks. Beside the station, there was a single horse-drawn carriage waiting for them, except it wasn't pulling by a horse. All three of them stopped and stared. Harry and Pepper clearly nervous, but Tony was worried but also excited. Whoa, is that a dragon? Zombie dragon, he said. It's not a dragon, Harley said. I don't know what it is. That animal is called a thistral, McGonagall told them, and despite its unusual appearance, it is a variety of winged horse. It's a horse, Tony thought. It looked more like a reptile than a mammal, aside from the bat wings. It had spines and a beak in its head, and a long, lizard-like tail. Although looking closer, its skin seemed to be leathery rather than scaly. It also looked literally dead. Seriously, he'd seen neglected animals in charity commercials with more meat on them than this thing, and its eyes were milky white. With it pawing at the ground like it was, it really did look like a zombie dragon horse. We wanted to introduce Harley to them before the school year started, McGonagall continued. You see, the Strals have the unusual ability that they are selectively invisible to many people, especially children. Tony looked at Harley to double-check. She could definitely see it from the way she was staring. But not Harley, he asked. No, I'm afraid not. You can only see the Strals if you have personally witnessed a human or other intelligent being die. Tony looked at Harley again, worriedly. She looked up at him. Oh, he said. Quirrell, Harley nodded. He supposed she'd also witnessed Lily and James's deaths, but she didn't remember those all the way. I am sorry you had to come into this so young, Miss Potter, McGonagall said sympathetically. And Miss Potts, you can see it as well. Ahais, Pepper said uncomfortably. I was technically the one who killed Obadiah Stane when he tried to kill Tony. And of course, Tony himself had seen a lot of death ever since the bombing in the Humvee in Afghanistan. Oddly, for all the death his company had caused, that had been his first time, at least in person. He'd lost his parents in a car crash, and he'd been traveling when Jarvis died. But of course, there had been reminiscence. But McGonagall wasn't done. You should also be aware that the Strals have a reputation for being unlucky because of their association with death, but this is mere superstition. They are difficult to tame and should not be approached in the wild, but the ones at Hogwarts are perfectly safe if treated with respect. Now, if you would please step aboard. They did. Tony was still watching the Thistral even as Harley sat a little closer to him. The thing must be able to see, he thought, despite its clouded eyes. That was less surprising after seeing Harley's invisibility cloak stomp all over the law of optics. Same for selective invisibility, though why it should be associated with death, much less so, he couldn't begin to guess. He was considering if it would be rude to ask for a blood sample when he realized there was something else bugging him about it. So, this might sound weird, but where's its ass? All three women stared at him in confusion. Excuse me, Mr. Stark, McGonagall said with an indignant tone. What do you mean? I mean its skin looks like it's been shrink-wrapped onto its pelvis. You know, I've been reading about zoology, anatomy, and stuff since I found out dragons are real. And that thing doesn't look like it has enough muscle to even move its legs, let alone pull a carriage. At that, McGonagall, Pepper, and Harley all looked at the Thistral again, watching more intently as it walked. It looked at least as strong as a normal horse in the way it moved, but he had no idea where that strength was coming from. McGonagall turned back to him. I believe the answer you're searching for, Mr. Stark, is magic, she said. No, Tony wasn't having the best start to his day. With the school empty for the summer, Tony got to take a proper tour of Hogwarts's castle and grounds, with Pepper tagging along as an extra pair of eyes. There was definitely more room to roam here and more magical resources than on the cramped Ilvermorny grounds. Besides which, Ilvermorny's library had been well stocked, but Hogwarts was simply so much older that it had a substantially bigger collection. The academic options were more limited because of its smaller size, but most of the teachers were recognized experts in their fields, not to mention Dumbledore himself. Most being the key word. Tony spoke to all 6 of Harley's current teachers. A new defense against the dark arts teacher hadn't been hired yet, and several of the elective teachers, and their record was hit and miss. About 2/3 of them did seem good, but as for the others first, Professor Kettleburn was clearly trying to project a tough Scotsman attitude, but Tony wasn't fooled. When the care of magical creatures teacher had 1 arm, 1 leg, and 1 eye, it wasn't a good sign. Although McGonagall claimed student injuries were quite rare. Next, there was the history teacher. "Can you do something about Professor Binns?" Tony said when they convened with Dumbledore in McGonagall's office. "If he wasn't already dead, I'd say he needs to be fast-tracked to a nursing home, as weird as that sounds. I don't think it's too much to ask for a teacher who remembers my daughter's name." McGonagall sighed, as if she had had this conversation many times. "Mr. Stark," she said, "Professor Binns has been dead since before Professor Dumbledore was a student." "And that matters," he demanded. "It does, for 2 reasons. First, the Board of Governors long ago cut his salary to part-time. We don't have a line item in our budget for a living teacher." Tony stared at her for a beat. "You do remember I'm rich, don't you?" Dumbledore cleared his throat. "That would be most generous of you, Mr. Stark," he said. "However, there is also the difficulty in finding a qualified replacement." "How so?" "Professor Binns was already old and a long-time teacher when he died. I was taught by him. The author of the current textbook was taught by him, and she is 30 years my senior. For those who are homeschooled, their parents or tutors were likely taught by him. There is no one still living whose scholarship of British magical history does not ultimately derive from Cuthbert." "There's still gotta be better ones out there," said Tony. "The textbook author." He hadn't missed Dumbledore's present tense there. Apparently there were witches who were still kicking into their 140s. "Professor Bagshot is far too old to work full-time, but I take your point," Dumbledore answered. "I am afraid there is not enough time for a hiring search before the new school year, but with funding secured, next year would be possible. Understand, you are under no obligation to—" "Please, I've given away a lot more for less," he interrupted. "Ask Pepper about my modern art collection." He looked out the window and thought for a bit. "By the way, how many ghosts do you have here?" he asked. 14 regulars in recent years," Dumbledore said, "and a few more who attend only for feasts, spending much of their time in Hogsmeade or elsewhere." "Going back how far?" "The eldest of them were taught by the founders themselves." "Any of them interested in teaching?" Dumbledore and McGonagall looked at each other in surprise, as if no one had suggested the idea to them before. "Really?" Tony said in surprise. "It's not like a ghost history teacher is a bad idea. It could be great. I just want one who knows what year it is." McGonagall considered. "I don't think any of them would want to do it full-time," she told Dumbledore. "I'm sure Sir Nicholas and the Friar would be willing to help, but you won't convince the Baron or the Grey Lady, and then there would be claims of favoritism between the house ghosts." "Lord Draben and the Black Knight might be willing to help," Dumbledore said, and then looked back at Tony. "None of the other ghosts would be well suited to take over the job in full, but I will ask them if they would help with Cuthbert's classes for this year." "Well, it's better than nothing," Tony conceded. And that left one other problem teacher to deal with. Reputedly a generational talent in his field, but also greatly disliked by 3/4 of the school and by Harley in particular. In fact, if he was as bad as she said, Tony was surprised she was willing to put up with him enough to come back here. "Mr. Stark," said Severus Snape disdainfully, "the headmaster told me I should expect a visit from you." Snape had demanded Tony come down to his office if he wanted to talk. Tony could grudgingly acknowledge the man's nerve, standing up to Iron Man like that. Or rather, sitting at his desk and doing paperwork for what looked like ingredient inventory, as if the conservation wasn't worth his full attention. Classic power move there, not that it would slow Tony down. He looked around the office as he entered. Harley had said the potions classrooms were in the dungeons, and they didn't disappoint, at least with regard to the atmosphere. That was. In all likelihood, these had been storerooms before they were converted to classrooms. Real dungeons had cells with door with bars in them and brackets for chains on the wall. But the kids probably wouldn't notice, and it looked enough the part, all bare stone and underground. Underground, he realized. I assume there's magical ventilation on these rooms, he said. I've seen working with volatile chemicals go wrong, and it's not pretty. Obviously, Snape said with a dismissive air, as if Tony was being the dumb one. You know, Harley's told me a lot about you, Tony said conversationally. Snape scoffed without looking up. The usual exaggerations, I assume. Well, you're definitely not her favorite. Granted, she was working partly off of wrong information. You mean when I saved her life and got set on fire for my trouble? Tony bristled slightly. You did, he said, ignoring Harley's assertion that it wasn't as bad as it sounded. Thank you, and if you were the security guard, I'd end it there. But Harley also had a lot to say about you as a teacher. I'm sure she did. But not everyone is well suited to the art of potion making, Snape replied. And not everyone's suited to be a teacher either. And I especially have to wonder about you singling Harley out. You gave her a pop quiz in her first lesson. Why? Snape looked up at him long enough to roll his eyes. Not that I need to explain myself to you, Stark, but I find it helps to set expectations early for the start of a new class. Harley was raised without magic. Even for someone with midgens, you shouldn't expect her to know everything the first day. It didn't seem to stop Granger. Regardless, it wasn't for academic scores. You took house points, he pointed out. A token amount. Really, Stark, if you're going to be the sort of parent who tries to litigate everything, you'll be better off taking your daughter to another school. Tony stepped forward and leaned over him. I trust Harley to fight her own battles for ordinary school stuff, but she said some things that worried me. Maybe she's biased, but she had receipts, and that made me start to wonder. That was enough to get Snape's undivided attention. He put his quill down and looked up at Tony with narrowed eyes. You think you know about me? He said suspiciously. I know a lot of things about you. Severus Snape, born January 9th, 1980 to Tobias Snape and Eileen Prince in Cokeworth, Lincolnshire. Working class background. Muggle father, witch mother. Snape rose to his feet. And how would you know that? Digital footprints ring a bell, Tony said. Living in the non-magical world leaves a trail. And these days, someone who was raised magical stands out by not leaving a trail. Your mother has barely any records until she got married. After that, birth announcement, home purchase, job history, occasional calls to the police for domestic disputes, divorced in 97, died of an unspecified illness in 99. I'm sorry to hear that. I know it's like to lose your parents young. Meanwhile, your father looked more or less normal for the Muggle world until he was found dead in a ditch in 02. His obituary didn't mention you. I get the feeling fewer condolences are needed there. The man's tone turned icy. Thaddeus' invasion of privacy, Stark. That's public record, Snape. That's how the Muggle world works. Maybe you've been out too long to remember that. But that wasn't the most interesting thing. I also happened to notice that you were born in the same year, the same month, and the Samitowners won Lily Potter, née Evans. Snape moved. With a flick, his wand was in his hand, pointing at the floor, and he swooped out from around his desk, getting right in Tony's face and backing him up to the wall. Tony stared worriedly and cursed that he didn't have his suit. He was used to pushing people to or even past their breaking points, but this came a lot faster than he'd expected, and he didn't have the protection he usually did. Okay, I've clearly hit a nerve, he said. Look, you know why I'm here. Your boss wants a decision on whether Harley is coming back here by Tuesday. Right now, you're not making a very good case. That seemed to be enough to make him come to his senses. He took a deep breath, stepped away, conspicuously didn't apologize. You are placing me in a more difficult position than you know, he said in a low voice. Have you told anyone this? Have you told Hallie? Tony stepped away from the wall and moved to where he had a clear path to the door. No, but it's not hard to find out, he said. Birth records are easy to get. And Holly knows other things. She found in the library that you and Lily both won potions awards in school, and there's what Quirrell and Dumbledore said. You had some kind of feud going on with James. Snape snarled at the name. Yep, definitely hit a nerve. Tony didn't know the full story, but he'd been in enough love triangles to start filling in the gaps. Right, you were friends once, weren't you? Lily. His eyes flashed dangerously, and his wand hand twitched. He kept it lowered, but his words were colder than ever. Don't speak about what you don't understand, Stark. I don't understand a lot of it, but I have eyes, Tony said. Whatever this is, I know it's personal, and I don't want Holly getting caught in the middle, especially seeing as she's Mickey and not James. Mentioning the magical adoption would be a bad idea here, although he might already know. Snape continued glaring at him, as if he was trying to bore into Tony's head with his eyes. He was practically shaking. For a moment, Tony was sure he was going to curse him. But he opened his mouth again, his words dripping with poison. You didn't deserve her. And there it was. Had they actually dated, or was it unrequited? He couldn't be sure, but Tony would bet on the latter. He hesitated. His natural inclination was to dispute it. He was some, and he'd impressed Lily fair and square with his genius. But becoming a father and managing to woo Pepper had tempered his pride a bit when it came to his past conquests. No, I didn't, he said, and he got a sort of satisfaction from seeing that it took the wind out of Snape's sails. Everyone says she was an amazing person. Back then, I was a rich jerk just looking for my next fling. He took a deep breath, remembering the past few weeks. I don't deserve Holly either. She's clever, determined, has my sense of humor, good enough coordination to impress Black Widow, and her smile lights up the room, but I've got her. And I'm here talking to you right now because I'm trying to be a better father to her than mine was. Snape scoffed. I'm sure the life of a millionaire's son was difficult. It's not a high bar, Tony said flatly. I cleared it when I said, I love you. Snape looked rattled. Briefly, before he mastered his features again, time to press the advantage. I don't know what happened between you and James, or Lily for that matter, but right now you're dealing with me, and I've got a kid to take care of. Snape was silent for a minute. What do you want? He finally said. Bare minimum, you treat Holly the same as you do the other Gryffindors. I don't like what I've heard about that either, but it's a start. You don't pull, Tony waved his hand around vaguely. What if Arthas was on her, and would it kill you to teach properly? Favoritism doesn't explain the way Holly described your lessons. He crossed his arms grumpily. Potions has been a heavily hands-on class since long before I started teaching here, he said. I can add a few more lectures about proper technique and how to avoid mistakes. Merlin knows I've seen enough of them, but I can't guarantee it will do any good. And as for Holly, perhaps I allowed my emotions to get the better of me. He looked like it might kill him to admit that. I will be sure to treat her the same as her classmates in the future. Good, Tony said, finally relaxing. Just remember I'll be keeping an eye on you, he added as turned to leave. He could almost hear Snape rolling his eyes again. Stark, he called sharply just before he reached the door. Tony turned around expectantly. I don't want Holly to know, he said. Liliu moved in different circles in school. We didn't speak after our 5th year. No good would come of dredging it up. Tony appraised him carefully. The man looked like he was chewing glass. Something he told Himthus was a line that Snape was truly drawing in the sand. Fine, he answered, if you insist. I reserve the right to say Snape needs to be fired in the future, he told Dumbledore afterwards. The fact that I even needed to have that talk with him doesn't look good for him or the school. But I promised Holly I'd make the effort to give her a chance to come back. I appreciate that, Mr. Stark, he said, and I am sure Holly and her friends will be pleased as well. Yeah, I just hope I don't regret it, he said to himself. By the way, while I'm here, I had another maybe alchemy question for you. Oh, what is it? Do you know anything about vibranium? I confess my muggle chemistry is a little rusty, Dumbledore answered. The stuff Captain America's shield is made out of. Did you ever meet Cap during the war? You're in the SSR's files. Briefly, yes. And yes, I'd know about his shield. I asked him about it, but he didn't know how it was made nor how the SSR got the metal. I've always wondered how so much ethereal silver found its way into Muggle hands. Ethereal silver. Oh, yes. It's known for its unique energy and magic-absorbing properties, but it is exceedingly difficult to make alchemically, even in tiny quantities comparable to your celestial gold. The goblins, of course, are most adept at mining and working it, but they guard their reserves jealously. Tony swayed on his feet and sank into one of Dumbledore's chairs. The goblins have vibranium mines, he said. Why did I think this day was gonna be simple? They did not, in fact, like the bus any better than the flu.